Ira.
Okay.
Ira, yeah, nice to meet you. Hi. What's up? Okay. What's up? What's up? Yeah. I'm
Welcome
Ira.
to our
Nice to meet you.
November Security of Things Meetup. And it's a great, thank you everybody for turning out on a Tuesday evening, Thanksgiving week. This is pretty impressive turnout. We've got a great lineup, so not surprising. First of all, I wanted to offer a big thank you to IBM for hosting us this week. It's a really, really lovely space, as I'm sure you guys appreciate. And it was a great event to step up on somewhat short notice. Thanks to Maria at IBM for stepping up on short notice and providing this space to us, which is great. And of course, IBM's also providing our speakers this evening as well. So my name, if you haven't been here, how many people are new Security of Things Meetup people? This is your first meetup. Oh, wow, that's great. Okay, good. And I see some of the regulars as well. There is a sign-up list. I'd like to keep just track of who is coming versus RSVPing. And I don't do anything with your sign-up information. So herbal supplements companies or anything like that.
Well, today you can get it from.
So that herbal supplement spam is not from this meeting. Okay, so so this is we're coming up on our 3-year anniversary. Actually, December is going to be the 3-year anniversary of starting the Security of Things Meetup. I think we had our first. It was a couple months before we actually had our first meetup, though. So it depends on how we want to do the anniversary. But it's been a really wonderful 3 years. I think we've had a lot of amazing talks, discussions as this conversation has evolved. And I think the IoT and security conversation is getting much more mature, but also much more complex. And so we're looking forward to, very full 2018 as we continue to explore this topic. What I want to do now is to, and I say that by way of saying, if you have suggestions about topics that you would like to see addressed that are relevant to you in the work that you're doing or coming up in your workplace or just areas where you would like to expand your knowledge, please message me on the Meetup platform or email me. I'm just paul@securityledger.com. Or paul@securityofthings.com, and let me know what those topics are. If there are people you would like to see speak, either you've heard of them or seen them speak in other contexts and think they'd be a good fit for this meetup, or there are subject matter experts within your company, or it's you and you're a subject matter expert and you've got something you'd like to talk about, same thing, email me, message me on the Meetup platform, let me know. I'm always looking for people to come in and talk. As is Jeff Kohler, and you can email him as well. Jeff and I are co-run this group, and we've got our feelers out. We're doing Starbucks every month to be like, all right, who's going to talk next month? So help us out, and if you've got good ideas, let us know, and we will be happy to have them in. There's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in the Boston area, Boston, Cambridge area around IoT. So security is a piece of that. It doesn't have to be strictly security. If it's got that IoT theme to it, and it's privacy related. Or just in a big, important Internet of Things topic that you think this group would benefit from knowing about, let me know. Okay. Okay. Without further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker up, Mr. Ted Julian. Come on up. So Ted is a co-founder of Resilient Systems. Your products?
Yes.
Yeah. You've been with Resilient really almost since the get-go. I remember running with you and talking about Resilient when it was still an idea in somebody's brain. And Resilient was acquired by IBM.
Yep.
And it's in the incident response space. So here, let's see. But Ted actually has a very long and impressive pedigree in the Boston information security space, starting way back with your first company, which was AdStake.
Yeah.
which was kind of, is everybody familiar with AtStake? Yeah, AtStake was in some ways kind of the security services firm. Grew out of law and really pioneered, eventually acquired by Symantec, but pioneered a lot of the tools and techniques that really become kind of foundational for this industry.
And what's been really amazing for me is to see the AtStake diaspora, which is sort of like an acknowledged, these AtStakers have gone on to do incredible things at lots of different places.
Including yourself.
Well, if you say so, but yeah. But anyway, that to me has been one of the most fun things.
Yeah.
Veracode, probably.
Yeah, Chris Weisopel and Chris Ang, and
Yep.
The Chris's.
Chris True. Yeah.
Chris True, yep. Where does Duo have some?
That's Arbor.
Or that's Arbor,
Yeah.
that's right, okay. But tonight we're going to talk about incident response, particularly as it relates to Internet of Things. So this is the Internet of Things MeetUp group. And one of the questions I think we really struggle to understand is how the as a phenomena really changes the conversation, information security. That's risk, defense, offense. Most of what we have traditionally think about with information security is really predicated on protecting enterprise networks, enterprise assets from Internet of Things really blows that whole thing up if it hadn't been blown up already. Yeah. So maybe start by just, for the crowd, kind of defining, telling us a little bit about Resilient, what they do, and when we're talking about incident response, what do we really mean by that?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. So the idea that led to Resilient was really simple, frankly. If you looked at the last 30 years of information security, we probably spent maybe roughly a decade in prevention. Realized that was worthwhile, but it wasn't perfect. So then we spent another 10 years in detection, realizing that if prevention isn't going to work, we better have better detection. And then realized that was good too, but that stuff still continues to happen. And we talked with customers and said, all right, so your detective control, whatever it might be, throws an alert. You need to pull together some sort of incident response process. What do you do? And routinely we'd hear spreadsheets, ticketing system, email, chat, those things. Maybe in the extreme you'd hear, oh, we've hacked our ticketing system to try to do this or whatever. But, you know, general purpose tools sort of try to sort of fulfill this function. And that just seemed like enough. You know, like that was ripe territory to try to do something better. So really just what turned into a case management system for incident response. I guess what made it unique is content, ranging from, we've got 12 in the product for what you should do for DDoS versus phishing versus malware or whatever. With threat feeds, other related detective enrichment controls to be able to do streamline the process. That led to customers saying, well, these runbooks are great. We've got consistency. We've got repeatability. That's really helpful for us to do, like finding where this hash is present. If we could click a button within the, you could do that. That'd be really powerful. So that led to a whole orchestration and automation right now. But to me, what's been the most gratifying, I guess, over the last 6 years is going from this idea that, you know, Paul and I discussed jogging to a product after 3 years of hard work and lots of sleepless nights wondering if this company is going to continue to exist. It wasn't pretty, just trust me. Now almost 300 customers and some of the biggest brands in the world that really use this platform on a daily basis for how they manage incident response. And to see how it's transformed not just their incident response capability, but frankly their security posture, because as they've done that, they come to understand things and be able to relate their mission to the chief executive, to the highest level of executives and even the board in ways that they can really understand. It's not vulnerability counts, it's no, we have a huge uptick in phishing attacks in India, and it's because we're doing this new outsourcing thing for this one business unit. Here's the data behind it, how long it's taken us to respond, and that's why we keep asking you for another set of heads to do the training or a product to help us deal with it or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we, in the context of North Korea, we talk a lot about left of launch, but incident response is really right of launch, right?
Yeah.
So people So I think the conversation was so predicated on keeping bad guys out that there was actually we were weak, or that we were immature around. Well, assuming you're not going to do that, which I guess everyone kind of accepts now.
Yeah.
What have you done? What planning have you done? What resources do you have? What tools do you have? And the answer, as of about 5 or 6 years ago, was not much.
Horrible.
Right? Horrible. Yeah, run around screaming with your hair on fire.
Heroics.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, heroic efforts by a very small group of people, and God forbid they left to go on vacation years ago.
Right. So, and you mentioned the term orchestration, and that gets thrown around a lot. So just kind of drill down a little bit. When we're talking about orchestration, is that the same as automation?
Thanks. So we view orchestration as sort of the superset and automation as one piece of it. So, and there's a lot of buzz around automation for good reason. I mean, people in SOCs, especially tier 1 and tier 2, they're really overwhelmed with tons of alerts. The process remains pretty manual for how you try to enrich an indicator and figure out, is this bad or not? And if it is bad, how is it bad? And what actor might be involved and what might they be trying to do? 10 tabs open in your browser to various resources to try to do all this work. And it's a real problem. I mean, it's jamming up the works at a lot of organizations. And so thought that you could apply some automation technology which would take this indicator and automatically do a series of enrichment, like figure out, is this hash bad or not? If not, okay, well, let's now run it in a sandbox, and do we see malicious behavior? And if we do, of what type? And what other indicators might we surface as part of watching that thing detonate? And then let's do enrichment on those. And then maybe if we're sufficiently confident, we then may want to take automatic mitigation action because we're, feeling that that's a safe decision. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. It's really important sort of progression in how we manage security incidents. But frankly, we view orchestration as the superset, and what it weaves in is the ability to manage people and process as part of that broader workflow. Because let's face it, even if it's what you might think as a use case that's pretty automatable, at some point, somebody probably has to decide that this is a good idea, or your policy probably dictates that before you're going to go ahead and quarantine those endpoints, somebody should sign off that this is appropriate. But then there's other incident types where it just never is going to work. Ransomware would be a great example, where there's pieces of that workflow you could automate, but eventually someone's going to have to probably determine, do we have a recent backup or not? How valuable is that data? Based on the value of the data, what's the ransom? Humans are going to be involved in those decisions, right? And deciding, oh, we got a backup, it's quite recent, we don't give a crap. Or, we don't, so actually we give some level of crap. That data is really valuable. Okay, the crap count's going up a little bit. The ransomware is not that bad. Okay, let's get finance involved, right? I mean, I trivialize it, but you can really imagine these as ideally workflows, right? Where as you're working through this journey, as these things are determined, you're pulling in those appropriate resources to make those decisions.
You're like a ransom meter where it's like each checkbox, how much you should be paying.
Yeah. There's poop emoji involved.
Did anyone hear about the town in Tennessee that refused to pay the $250,000 ransom and basically is dead in the water right now? They're writing 911 calls down on whiteboards and sending out.
What was compromised?
Huh?
What was compromised?
I guess everything. I mean, from what I understand, all of their critical servers, and they didn't want to take ransom, so they didn't go on, and they're figuring out maybe a little bit too late that they didn't really have a good. I don't know. Maybe they thought they had a backup, and then something to do backup. They're really. And this is in the context of IoT as well. The ramifications now, we saw this with NotPetya as well, are cyber-physical, right? So it's not just you've got productivity hit or you've lost data that you need to recover or recreate. It is really about life and limb. 911 calls not being routed properly. In the case of NotPetya, Maersk, shipments tied up in ports where the company doesn't know where the shipment is, and the customer certainly doesn't know where it is. So, huge kind of ripple effects out in the economy as well.
Huge issues there. Bruce is going to have tons of fun stuff to say to you guys about that.
So, this sounds sort of like when I think sort of crawl, walk, run, this sounds like, if not if not sprinting, certainly running. So where do you have to be on the maturity curve as a corporation? Because we know there's a long tail of organizations that are not mature. Maybe they're just small businesses and they just don't have an IT person, or their IT person wears 10 different hats, all the way up to the companies. I know you guys have some marquee companies who use your technology. They have obviously very robust IT security teams. So where do you have to be?
Yeah, for IR to consider orchestration, you mean? Or
Yes.
Yeah, so we do actually have a really nice maturity model that I built with a good friend, Sean at Cisco, who manages their incident response process. And just to simplify it, it starts with, do you have codified procedures, that you can that you can run on a consistent basis? And that sounds really simple, but I'll tell you a funny story. So, yeah, like any company selling a product, we go through the, a sales process, and at some point along the line, we'll try to assess the customer for their maturity. Like, do you have run books, and are you using them on a regular basis, and that sort of thing? And quite often in the early stage of the sales process, oh yes, absolutely, and oh, so you have different run books for DDoS versus phishing versus malware. These are naturally very different. Oh yes, absolutely, we do. Okay, great. And so let's say we're fortunate enough that we kind of go through that process and the customer selects that they're going to go with Resilient. Naturally, our professional services team, as part of onboarding, is going to go back to them and say, hey, those run books we heard about, we'd love to get those for you because we want to put them into the platform to make sure that we customize it to your standard operating procedures. And I've come to realize that there is a black hole that is sucking up all of these run books around the universe. I don't know where they wind up because our PS team sure as heck can't find them.
Right. They're moving stuff around the desk. Where? It was just here.
Billy the intern must have took them. Gosh darn it. Is he coming back next summer?
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Internet of Things and kind of, I guess first, what are you seeing? Has this become a topic of conversation either with existing customers or potential customers as you're going in to talk about their IT environments, the assets and data that they're looking to protect? Are cameras and DVRs and other, obviously, heavy equipment becoming a part of the conversation?
They are, although I think it's safe to say it's very, very early stages for this conversation because, if we think back to this silly story with the black hole sucking up the run books, we know that things aren't good for your typical organization. Deployment's done a great job of cataloging every year just how long response times are, how ill-prepared most organizations are in terms of having standard codified procedures. And per your question earlier, if you don't have that, you don't have a foundation. To do anything more, you're just building a house on top of a foundation that doesn't exist, and that's obviously a really bad idea. So that is definitely where organizations need to start. And we basically, the whole company's been a journey, but even individual customers, it's a journey where we sort of pick them up at a certain point in their existence and we kind of take them from there. But on the IoT side, it is much the same, where they need to have that foundation built of what their standard operating procedures are. And it's only then that you can take that first step of, all right, well, let's get them into a platform, let's get that consistency and repeatability, assigning tasks, assigning due dates, the ability to report on all of that. That's goodness. It's a place that we weren't really at before. And then only having done that, does it make sense to maybe look at orchestration and automation, or even some basic integrations with related IoT systems. That said, we're fortunate, we're really fortunate, goodness knows, to have some really smart, progressive customers doing some amazing stuff. So I remember years ago, this is a true story, this is Paul's a good friend, so Jessie, my daughter. Mm-hmm. She was like a senior in high school. She was working as part of a summer internship here at Resilient, and there was a large power company in the South who wanted to start to use our platform for hurricane response. And so they had incredibly detailed response plans by T-minus. So, how far away is the hurricane? T-minus 96, T-minus 48, and so on. And so we got those and gave them to Jessie. And Jessie dutifully, all right, Dad, this seems crazy. I barely understand what you guys do. But she's putting them in the Resilient for this customer. And I got to say, it was once it was done, they go back and show them this was very powerful. As basic as it was, to get them out of these huge paper run books that when the hurricane is going to happen, they go into their lockdown facility. I was in it. It's pretty impressive, actually. You got it. And they're like flipping through these things. And to do a tabletop exercise where they're in our platform, doesn't matter where they are, they're able to look through these tasks. Was pretty cool. Now let's fast forward a couple years. If I'm not mistaken, we had kind of a big hurricane in Florida this past year, right? So
And Texas and Puerto Rico.
yeah. And so Jessie is my daughter. She's a freshman in college right now. I don't even get a chance to reach out to her. She reaches out to me and she says, "Dad, are they using my runbooks?"
They probably are,
I
right?
think they were.
She's a part of that response. Yeah. I mean, my sense, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the organizations that are the furthest along in thinking about this are organizations that have been managing, critical infrastructure or industrial networks. So manufacturing, and energy, mining, obviously healthcare, those types of. On the other hand, those networks have historically been separate from their IT networks, and the tooling has been very siloed, relative to security, IT security tooling, relatively immature. So how do you, if you're talking to a company like that, on one hand, they're ready to have a conversation with you that's a sophisticated conversation, they thought about these issues. On the other hand, the platforms and the tools they're using are probably, they're speaking Latin and you're speaking Greek.
Yeah, I mean, those systems aren't ready for it, nor are we, really, to be completely honest with you. I mean, to the degree that people are doing stuff in this arena, it really is along the lines of that power company I was talking about, where it's much more process-oriented, as opposed to getting ready to take that next step to integrate those technical controls in what they're doing. They do tend to be, outside of IoT, we have a good number of customers that are using our platform just in the pure cyber realm to punch well above their weight. I can think of one large pharma in Europe where their incident response, the security team as a whole is not big, it's less than a dozen people. And probably the people who are doing IR, it's all part-time. It's 4 happens to be guys who, when something happens, they get involved in the process. But leveraging, the platform, our O&A capabilities and so forth, they are punching so well above their weight with how they're able to act in response to an incident. But I bring that up because that's sort of the exception. Like in that pure cyber realm, we're able to make that happen. Whereas in the IoT realm, we've not seen that yet. To the degree that we're doing stuff there, it is very early and it is the largest of enterprises. One example I can think of, I was in London a couple weeks ago. It was at a very large global bank. You all will be very familiar with the brand. And they really view 3 types of incidents that they deal with. There's, of course, cyber incidents. Then there's their whole physical security realm. And then there's fraud, because it's a bank. And fraud, that's a whole different, and it's a whole different animal. Like, we'd like to integrate this at some point, but we're just going to set that aside for now. But that said, what they have done is use Resilient for both the physical and the cyber realm. And indeed, they're so committed that what they did is they have a whole team of people, including about a dozen developers, who built kind of a front end on top of Resilient that allows their executives to do sort of a Google search, if you will, anywhere in the world, and they can see, all right, here's all of the facilities in that region. They can zoom in and see, all right, of these facilities, these are the number of employees that generally have access to these buildings. These are the number that are currently badged in. Here's the current number of open cyber incidents. Here's the current number of open physical incidents. And then they're now working on the ability to drill down into that detail into Resilient, where they're tracking all of the nitty-gritty on these different incident types. That's my sort of best of breed kind of global example of trying to span both the cyber with an incident response capability.
Right. I mean, the physical piece is the other piece that historically gets left out as well, right? Which is people tailgating into your facility, giving them physical access to your devices, working their way possibly even into your data center with a USB stick. So all those are things that the badges piece of it guns and badges piece of it has traditionally been separate, and there have been efforts over the years to try and integrate those two things, but it's still.
Yeah, and even this customer hasn't done that yet.
Yeah.
Based on the description I gave you, right? It's very process oriented. They're not going from resilient to grab a live camera feed from the facility,
Right.
or even badge swipes, maybe. Maybe they're doing that. If not, that might be coming soon. That would probably be like their first kind of step of actually integrating those systems. But I would just use that as a great example of how it is a crawl, walk, run approach, and that I thought they were brilliant. The fact that they tried to get themselves the consistency and repeatability on process, while at the same time realize that dashboard I described to you, like they would not be willing to wait for as long as it would take for us to do that, right? And they knew that. They're very upfront about that. So they funded it themselves because they realized that this was going to be critical to executive buy-in. If we make this investment and we're able to sort of show that to our executives, that's going to be the kind of eye candy that's going to cause them to say, hey, this project was good to fund. We want to continue to fund this, both from a technology and a people perspective. And then having sort of delivered some of the fundamentals with some of the eye candy on top, they can continue to fund kind of everything in the middle. You know?
Bright shiny objects for the executive.
Tell you, it works.
Yeah. Those banks, those really big banks, I mean, you realize, like, you know, if you're a Bank of America or Wells Fargo, you have so many branches that, you know, you could be getting held up almost on a daily basis. You know, I mean, if you have thousands of branches, even something as weird or as out of the ordinary as a stick up, you know, you may get a lot of those.
Well, in their case, I mean, I think they probably had some level of visibility on that previously. For them, it was they already had examples where there was a bridge, where there were physical incidents that were linked to cyber incidents.
Yeah.
And it was a blind spot for them.
Yeah.
And so that really was the strategic objective they were trying to meet, is to be able to bring those worlds together so that they could close that gap.
And for financial services, that insider threat in particular is a
Great example.
Is a huge, right?
Bingo.
Those are the 10x damage attacks are the insiders. It's interesting. I mean, that conversation, just what you were saying there, like, oh, there's the kind of candy for the C-suite. But I mean, that's a very common. I hear that a lot, which is as information security, cybersecurity is moving from a practitioner. You know, this is something that resides within our IT team, within and it's actually a sub-discipline within IT to something that is material to the company, right? So Maersk, FedEx, Mondelez Candy, right, all had to make SEC declarations about impacts to earning as a result of NotPetya. So something that's going to shave 2% off your quarterly earnings. All of a sudden, that's something that is very of interest and relevant for the board. But these are not people who are domain experts in information security. So you can't go in there and show them, log events or vulnerability scans or a screen capture from your SIM. You need a way to talk to them in terms that they understand.
Oh, that's been huge for us. I mean, honestly, I think I alluded to it previously. One of the most gratifying parts of the adventure for me is seeing how they've leveraged the easy ability to get data that the board can understand. Incidents by type over time, by geo, by business unit, things of this nature, that previously only the biggest, best funded organizations. I can think of one of the largest banks in the world, incident response alone, forget broader IT security, 1,200 people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Despite that level of now, admittedly, like, not all of those were probably full-time, but still, like, when they were scoping how many people might be involved in incident response.
That include like chasing a robber down the street with a bag of money?
I think we're talking cyber, actually. That's physical, to be honest.
Okay.
Actually. Anyway, despite that level of investment, obviously, to gather basic data like incidents by type over time, BU, geo, that sort of thing, eight people spend the last 2 days of every month manually pulling that to get data together. So if that's what it takes for them to do it, then obviously for the rest of the world, it's just they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And that first step is the beginning of a journey, really, for how we've seen customers be able to transform the dialogue by putting it in terms that are just easily understandable.
So you said it's early days for IoT in the enterprise. We're seeing the beginning stages of this. I mean, now maybe the the wedge in the door is IP-enabled surveillance cameras or even smart TVs. It's more network-connected devices. There used to be, multifunction printers. Sure, that those are still there, but other stuff now too. Stuff that's going to be sitting on the employee's desktop, stuff that's going to be in the environment, maybe stuff that's hooked up to the HVAC or the badging system. From a position of IBM Resilient, what are the obstacles to you to bring that into your worldview? Do you need an agent on all those little devices? Do they need to be speaking some lingua franca that they're not speaking? What are the barriers?
That's a good question. So we'll break it down.
Yeah, right.
Think about that for a minute. We'll break it down. I mean, what are the things you're going to want to do? Well, the first thing you're going to want to do typically is the ability to escalate. So whether it's directly from those devices or from something that provides aggregate management of those devices, you'd like the ability to say, that's not good, let's get a case built in Resilient.
Mm-hmm.
But then the next step is usually is enrichment. So great, we've got a case, we want to be able to investigate this more thoroughly. We now need to get like indicators of compromise or forensics information or things of that nature so that we can better understand, is this bad? If so, how bad is it? Why is it bad? To all inform, okay, what can we now do about it? I don't know that we even know the answers yet, to be honest with you. I mean, our platform is really very open. It's a modern web application. It's a nicely documented RESTful API. So we've got customers doing all sorts of crazy stuff, leveraging the API, which would be able to support some of those use cases. But I think in the cyber realm, we enjoy, enjoy is a funny choice of words, right? Because we do, in a way, enjoy like the plethora of the capability we have on that and a fairly mature and robust ability to gather data and massage that data. I mean, I joke about it being enjoy, right? Because it's actually also a problem, right? We have too much data, we can't make sense of it. I think SIMs are frankly hysterical. Like, in what other domain could you have a product that by itself actually does nothing? It just gathers up all this stuff from your other stuff to try to help you deal with that stuff.
Yes.
I mean,
it's stuff sorter.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So anyway, we have no lack of instrumentation or data there, and we just don't have anywhere near that structure or even standard operating procedure established in kind of the IoT realm.
You were saying you have customers who are in kind of the industrial control space.
Yes.
Or it's not space, but they have ICS equipment, they have SCADA devices, and they have maybe built some playbooks, some runbooks around that.
Yes.
So what do those look like?
Well, they're no worse, frankly, than the ones on the IT side. I mean, the trick of it is to go from that. There's a level of just good standard best practices from an incident response perspective relative to that domain. And I don't mean to minimize that, because that's actually, a lot of people don't even have that. But then going from that basic level of, I don't know, Maslow's kind of shelter, what's next up from shelter? It's not self-realization, that's the top of it. Top of the table. Basically, our internet access, Wi-Fi. Okay? Yeah. That's my kids would agree anyway. That's practical.
No ESPN.
In fact, we might need that before shelter. Actually, we could suffer in the rain for a little bit with some Wi-Fi.
Yes. Data plan, right? Shelter,
Okay,
data plan.
thank you. Yeah.
Wi-Fi rage.
All right, now I've completely forgotten where we were at entirely. Yeah.
You're talking obviously about stages of need and maturity. Industrial control system SCADA.
Oh, yes.
Right.
So just not having anywhere near that level of sophistication to be able to grab that data consistently. And so we see people doing things just like email. Everything can send an email. And if that email can be made structured, then a platform like Resilient can parse that structured email and be able to say, this is not just a SCADA incident. And we see this all the time. I can't say we've seen it for SCADA, we see it for phishing. So a customer will look at that and say, 85% of all of our reported phishing attacks fall into one of four categories. We're going to define a workflow for each of them, and then we're going to use Resilient to help us orchestrate that workflow. And so I could very easily see the same thing happen for SCADA. They say, look, these are the four most critical things that we could see happening or that we do see happening. Let's create a structured email for these, have Resilient parse that as it comes in, and it kicks off a nice structured workflow, potentially including some enrichment via orchestration and automation to help guide the analysts to the conclusion.
What do we do, and by we mean, I guess, like society generally, about sort of the internet of crap, right? Which is all of the low quality and low security connected devices that are, Bruce is here, that are being sold to consumers, but also finding their way into the workplace as well, right? And where there isn't a desire, incentive, motivation for companies to add the types of features that are going to allow a platform like Resilience to be able to do it. You know, there's nobody on the other end of the line who's going to answer that support call and say, oh yeah, we'll have that. You know, we'll take care of it.
No, I'm sure Bruce will have a lot to say on this. Is right up his alley. I mean, it's the perfect storm from a bad storm. Like there's a good storm, right? Because you just don't
The perfect
have
storm was a bad storm.
it was.
Yeah.
You don't have anywhere near the level I think of kind of certainly accountability, let alone attention from the manufacturers kind of on what's right to do here. But as you allude, the whole supply chain is sort of all messed up. That makes it that much easier to sort of hide from having any sort of position of accountability. And then you throw in the how difficult they can sometimes be to reach, whether that's over the network or God forbid physically, if that's how you got to do it. It's a mess. And so that, without a question, is the much bigger issue than a platform like ours' ability to kind of solve the problem. We can only be as good as our ability to ultimately reach these devices. Now that said, I'll point back to what we said earlier, which is most customers struggle with the basics. So forget if you can reach these devices easily and how easy might it be to patch and upgrade them. If you don't even have a plan, then that's not, you're not at that problem yet. You got more fundamental issues you need to address first. And I think that unfortunately that remains the reality for a lot of organizations. How many organizations, for example, do a tabletop exercise of any description? Forget IoT. So every quarter we're going to get the team together. We're going to go through an exercise to practice a particular incident type that either we experience all the time and we want to practice, or a competitor in our industry has seen it, and so we want to see if we're ready. And so we get everybody around the table. We go through the process of, all right, let's pretend this happened to us and figure out what happened, right? Not nearly enough organizations do that for cyber. I bet precious few do that for IoT. And I would say to you, if you've not done that, then you don't know what you don't know. And you're not even close to having your lack of ability to remotely reach a device and upgrade it with a patch being your biggest problem. You got much more fundamental issues.
Yeah. Are there questions for Ted from the audience? Okay, hold on. Say your name.
Hi, I'm Berkman. So, thinking about the product you're working on, that is for IT professionals. Security of things are in our houses now. It's everywhere. So, where do you think your product would be for those people who know nothing about technology at all? The grandmas and grandparents and everybody else. And certainly their devices are attacking. I've taken incidents like DIN systems, and there was a huge outage because they thought that that was a true DDoS attack and they couldn't control. How do you think, are you guys even thinking about that? How would we solve that problem?
Yeah.
When it is, everybody is attacking certainly everything.
Probably not through grandma, but through the provider. And we do have some customers that are doing that. A very large electricity supplier in France is a customer, for example, and one of their stated use cases for not just using Resilient, but we're just one piece of a much, much, much bigger project, is around being able to instrument the home for electricity and more broadly around IoT to be able to flag incidents, describe those incidents, prescribe a response plan for the provider to be able to follow, to be able to operate on behalf of protecting their customers. very early stages, but I'm glad you asked the question because that was a use case we kind of talked about bringing up that we forgot to kind of address that is happening. And they may be the first, but they're by no means the last. I think there's enormous opportunity there. Frankly, it's going to be a requirement for somebody who wants to be successful in that kind of business. That's what will distinguish the people who are in for the long haul from those who are flash and pan.
Yeah, Justin Armstrong. Yeah, your case about the hurricane response got me wondering, is it possible to deploy the resilient platform on some kind of portable, maybe a few different laptops so that you can work in it? Because I can imagine if the power's down and everything else is down.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a VM, so you can put it on anything. And we do have customers that are doing that. I think we might be on some battleships, for example, as an example of that, where they're self-contained networks.
And then can it like sync up with the mothership, so to speak, when you come back to port?
I mean, what I hadn't actually thought about to answer the question is so much of what we do is around enrichment for threat feeds and stuff like that. And that's obviously where you need some level of connectivity to be able to do that. And I mean, it's ultimately a networking issue, but I can't think of customers I don't know how customers are tackling that specific particular problem. But there again, I would point back to, it's just so easy for any of us who are technologists to just get so enamored of all of the orchestration and automation capabilities, because it is super exciting, and no doubt it can have an enormous impact. But let's go back to what we know. And the Poneman data does a great job of proving this. You would think if you read the papers that everybody's ready to just automate this thing from end to end, and the truth, of course, is that that couldn't be further from the truth. And that most organizations don't even have a plan. And so in that case, forget having connected to the broader network. If all you get by having something like Resilient on your closed system there is consistency and repeatability on the standard operating procedures that you've worked very hard to define, then for most organizations, that's the first step they need to take, frankly. And it's a big step, it's an important step. Especially when you think about like the skills gap and just all these other things that organizations are contending with. Might sound, documenting your standard operating procedures, putting them in a platform where you get consistency and repeatability. It's tough, it's hard. People are moving around, things aren't just documented as they should be.
Well, actually, now you mentioned, like a lot of some of our hospital customers that did have ransomware, everything was down. Their email was down, they had access to nothing. So that's why it would be helpful to have it segregated somehow. So
in the earliest days, we had a sales call with a bank, and at that time, we only had SaaS as a way of delivering the platform. And early on, they're like, "Oh, we don't do SaaS." I'm like, "Okay, have a nice day. We'll move on to the next one." But then he said, "Except for this." I was like, "Oh wow, this is gonna be good. Come on, what's the payload here?" And that was the reason. He's like, "Well, it's an incident response system. I mean, of course, we want it to be on completely separate, completely distinct systems to segregate the information, to be sure that we have availability. After all, this is his words, not mine. This is an incident response platform. We're using it specifically because our infrastructure is suspect. We need to have it someplace else."
Let's give a big hand for Ted Julian.
I just wanted to say something really quickly for those of you who've not been here before, right? We're now in kind of the auditorium here on the ground floor of this new kind of effectively worldwide headquarters for IBM Security. And as a 20-year Bostonian, it was super exciting for me anyway when this was sort of built and Resilient, having been recently acquired, kind of moved in here, because I think it's a real physical testament to Boston's and Cambridge's sort of role in the cybersecurity realm. One of the things I'll mention to you who may not be familiar is that upstairs on the third floor, we actually have a cyber range. And for those of you who are at end user organizations, we're constantly bringing people through there and doing live exercises. And they are super powerful, where we will put, it doesn't matter, it could be execs, board members, people in the trenches, through a simulated exercise of a breach, and it ranges from the technical to putting you on the green screen and interviewing as though you're talking to CNN about what's going on. And it's been a real thrill to see the revelations that's created with some of the most sophisticated organizations that were so sophisticated, we're worried. I mean, they're going in there and I'm like, are they gonna come out and say like, "Oh, this is a nice little Tinker Toy exercise you guys have going on here. That's cute, thank you," But that hasn't happened yet. I mean, every single group has taken away, transformative ideas from this or best practices from this. So I just wanted to let you know that we're here, this is here, that's there, and if it's something that you're interested in, we'd be happy to try to get you connected to the right people and pull people from your organization through that exercise if it might be helpful to you in your daily jobs.
And maybe we'll organize a meetup tour of the facility or something.
Oh, yeah. It was on the Today Show like 2 weeks ago. Can I tell you how weird that was? Like they do the video segment and then they go to Matt Lauer, right? And he's like, I barely know who this guy is. And he's like, that actually was really cool. And he meant it. I was like, oh, wow, maybe we've jumped the shark now. Anyway, thank you guys very much. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Ted. So for our next speaker, I don't think needs much introduction, but I'll give him a short one anyway. Bruce Schneier is a renowned technologist, and he is the author of 13 books, including most recently Data and Goliath, in Battles to Collect Your Data and Control Your World. He is the author of the Cryptogram newsletter, which many of you should subscribe to. If you don't, you should. And the author of the Schneier blog, and he's at Schneier blog on Twitter as well. One of the most respected voices in the cybersecurity and the information security industry. He is, Bruce, what is your title at Resilient? CTO.
You look at that, CTO of IBM.
CTO, right. CTO of IBM Resilient. He's also a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, where he just finished teaching, and he came over here right after. Thank you so much. He is a board member of the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Access Now, and the Tor Project, and an advisory board member at EPIC, the Electronic Privacy Information Center. I'm very, very pleased to welcome Bruce Schneier to the Security of Things Meetup and give him a big round of applause.
If I could do this without leaking like you did, I'll use this. All right, testing.
Yeah.
People in the back, can you hear me? All right, still managed to cook Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah. I can charge this without giving away all my iPhone secrets. Possibly go wrong.
Just plug it in. It usually is fine.
Not even getting power. Right, never mind. Dude. Yeah. Plug this into something with power, please. And don't let me forget it. Right. Let's see how this goes. In the back, if you have trouble hearing, please say something. Otherwise, it's no fun. So hi, welcome. Thanks for inviting me. I want to talk about the IoT security industry and how I think they're colliding and changing. Yeah. So in 2011, Mark Andreessen, it was a Wall Street Journal op-ed. He wrote that software is eating the world. And what he meant, I think, is that we're creating a world where everything is a computer. And that's the world we live in today. That your smartphone is a portable computer that happens to make phone calls. And your refrigerator is a computer that keeps things cold. And a microwave oven is a computer that makes things hot. An ATM machine is a computer with money inside. And now your car, it used to be a mechanical device, an electromechanical device, an electronic device with some computers. Now it's a computer with 4 wheels and an engine. Actually, that's not true. It is a 100+ distributed system with 4 wheels and an engine. And this is true at all levels of our lives. And it's changing the way we interact with the internet. There's no longer a web that we connect to. We no longer enter chat rooms and upload and download. All those physical metaphors are when the computer was over there and we go to it and log on. None of those words make sense anymore. The internet is a network world we live in. It's all around us. Now I have two. No. Right? So this is the internet, right? This is what the Internet of Things is. Now, when I think of the Internet of Things, if you've heard me talk recently, you've heard me say this, I think of it in three basic parts. Actually, there's four. Let's 3.5. There's the sensors that collect data about our environment. There's the smarts that figure out what that means and what to do about it. Oddly enough, a lot of it's in the cloud. Not really expected. We thought Moore's law would make computers faster and better. Turns out it makes networks faster and better too, and it's actually way better for your smart television to listen to your voice, ship it up in the cloud, get a translated text, and ship it back. So the networking is really a part of this too. And the last part are the actuators that affect our environment. Right? The television channel changes. The thermostat turns the heat on or off. So you could think of the sensors as the eyes and ears of the internet. We are giving the internet direct sensing capabilities of all sorts. And you give the actuators as the hands and feet of the internet, giving the internet the ability to touch the world. Physically, really. And the stuff in the middle is the brain. So we are building an internet that senses, thinks, and acts. And if you've read classic science fiction, I have just defined a robot. And I think the way to think about the Internet of Things is that we're building a robot the size of the world and don't even realize it. Now, we don't realize it because it's not a robot in the classical sense. We get our robot definitions from television, movies, books, and we think of robots as discrete autonomous entities, right, with the smarts on the inside and a shell with the sensors and actuators on the surface. So that's the Star Wars robots, the Star Trek robots. That's all the that's all the robots, the Forbidden Planet robots. This is different. It's distributed. Parts are controlled by different people. The brains are somewhere else. It doesn't have a singular focus or singular goal. It's very loosely connected. And it's not deliberately designed. It's an emergent property of what we're building. And so smart things that act on the world in a direct physical manner. Now, we know smart is kind of aspirational. Right? Not all of it's smart. A lot of it's going to be really dumb for a long time. But it is getting more capable and more powerful as we connect more things to it. And what this means is that internet security becomes everything security. It is no longer separate. And the lessons we've learned from internet security become applicable everywhere. In a way that is, I think, heading for some pretty serious consequences. Right? So what do we know about computers and security? I have 8 things. 1, most software is poorly written and insecure. And basically, we as the market don't want to pay for quality software. Good, fast, cheap, pick 2. We have picked fast and cheap at the expense of good. Poor software is full of bugs. Some bugs contain security vulnerabilities. The software we use is littered with vulnerabilities. And you know this by how many security updates you get. 2, the inherent extensibility of computerized systems means they can be used against us. And this is important. The functionality of a computerized device cannot be constrained because it's a computer. When I was growing up, I had a telephone. It was attached to the wall, had a dial. That device was a really good telephone and only a telephone. No matter how much anybody ever wanted, it could never be anything other than a telephone. Compare that to your smartphone. It could be anything you want, right? That's what there's an app for that means. It fundamentally can do anything. Now, there's a couple of effects of this. These continuously evolving systems are hard to secure because the designers can't anticipate how they're going to be used, what they're going to do. Every computer can get upgraded with additional features, either by you or by someone acting against your interest. It's basically what malware is. It is a feature upgrade that you didn't want. And I can put that on your computer in a way that I can't put that on that 1950s telephone, because there's no way to receive it. All right, 3. The complexity of computerized systems means that attack is easier than defense. There's a lot here. I'm not going to unpack it all, but basically complexity is the worst enemy of security. Okay, one way to think of it is the attacker has to find one way in, the defender has to defend all possible ways in. Some of you hear that said as the systems with very large attack surfaces. This means, 1, attack is easier than defense, and it is. And 2, that security testing is hard. Too many options, too many configurations, too many interactions. You can't do the same level of security testing as I can do, I don't know, purity testing for water. Just one thing, I do it, I'm done. Security test for your phone is much more complicated if you can do it at all. 4, there are new vulnerabilities in those interconnections. The more we connect things to each other, the more vulnerabilities in one thing affect other things. Like the Mirai botnet. Vulnerabilities in DVRs and CCTV cameras allowed attackers to launch a massive DDoS attack against a domain name server, Dime, which dropped a couple dozen popular websites. 2011, I think, Matt Honig, was a tech reporter, wrote a interesting story of his own identity theft. And let's see if I get this right. There's a vulnerability in his Amazon account, allowed hackers to get into his Apple account, allowed him to get into his Gmail account, allowed him to drop his Twitter account. And the vulnerabilities interconnected in ways that made that chain work that way and no other. Right? Target Corporation was hacked by someone who got into the HVAC supplier of a couple of central Pennsylvania stores. And the latest story I saw, we don't know who, one of the consultancies reported that a casino in Vegas was hacked by an internet-connected fish tank. Casinos will have to worry about fish tank vulnerabilities. Who knew? 5, computers are differently vulnerable. This is important because the real world is not ready for this. The internet allows things to scale. That's what it does. It also allows attacks to scale in ways that aren't possible without computer networks. That's a classic attack of stealing pennies from accounts. You need a computer to do it because the computer has to do it enough times. So speed, distance doesn't matter with computer attacks. And computers have this ability to decouple skill from ability. If you want to pick locks, you have to learn how to pick locks. If you want to break into computer systems, you just got to download software. The person has to learn how to do it. He writes the code, and now everyone else can. If that means we're no longer concerned about the security against the average attacker, we're now concerned about the security against the best attacker. Right? The hacker who wrote the Mirai botnet published the code. Within 2 weeks, there are a couple of dozen botnets using the same code. There's also the notion of a class break. We're used to that. Right? One day, Windows is insecure. Right? The next week, it's PDF files. Right? They're all secure, and then none of them are. That failure mode doesn't exist in the real world. When you think of auto manufacturers, they know how cars fail. They fail at some rate of failure. They figure out the parts, and meantime do the failure, and do all that math. You get a computerized car, and they all work great till one day when none of them do. But that's new. That's different. At 6, the threats are very often interlocking. A lot of different threats from many different actors, and they're interrelated. Securing against one might make you vulnerable to another. There's weird, unintended consequences. It's never as straightforward as it was in the real world. 7, attacks always get better. They never get worse. They get better, they get easier, they get faster. Some of it's Moore's law, computers get faster. But we saw passwords die that way. They used to be good, and then the computers got so fast that the number of passwords you could brute force search crossed the complexity of password you were likely to be able to memorize. They went from good to no good, just because, for no other reason than Moore's law. But there are also other reasons, because attackers get smarter, attackers adapt, attackers learn stuff. Right? Cryptanalysis gets better. Hacking tools get better. And that expertise flows downhill. So it starts off as a top secret NSA program, is a PhD thesis tomorrow, and a hacker tool the next day. Last, and I think this is actually the most important, is that everyone kind of likes insecurity. And this comes from a bunch of quarters. Right? Surveillance capitalism runs the internet. Google wants you to be really secure, except from them. Right? There is, all the money is not in securing your communications, but listening in it. And corporate control of customers and users is next. And that's something as easy as the iPhone store, where Apple controls what you are allowed to download on your phone, to John Deere and their tractors, the embedded software, which is owned by the company, cannot be maintained by the user, collects data about the user against the user's interest, and everything in between. On the government side, surveillance and control is increasing, right? Both by the more authoritarian governments, Russia, China, and others, and by the democratic governments, US, UK, and others. Cyber war is very much the new normal, ranging from espionage operations to information operations to actual attack. Now, the US spent a bunch of years disrupting North Korea's nuclear program through cyber attack. Right? We disrupted the Iranian nuclear program through a much more aggressive cyber attack. All of that, both corporate and government, is about creating and exploiting insecurity at its core. The more secure the systems are, the less effective those powers are doing what they want to do. Right. So up to now, this has been a manageable problem. Right? We've basically gotten by. What I described is not new. It's been around for years, and we've managed. And I argue, because we're building this world-sized robot, we are reaching a crisis. Right? This is no longer sustainable. That either we take this seriously, or we're headed to catastrophe. And I don't use that word lightly. But so what's changing? The computers and what they're doing are changing. Automation, autonomy, and physical agency bring some serious new dangers. Like computer security, the CIA triad. Traditionally, we were primarily concerned with confidentiality. Privacy, data theft, data misuse. Right? But the threats come in various forms. Threats. Ransomware is an availability threat. Threats. Data manipulation. Stealing money from bank accounts is an integrity threat. Today, with the Internet of Things, the integrity and availability threats are much worse than the confidentiality threats. Right? Because the effects are much greater. And there are real risks to life and property. You know, I kind of don't want my car hacked and someone, I don't know, eavesdrops on the Bluetooth connection, or uses the microphone to eavesdrop, or hacks the GPS to figure out where the car's going. But I really don't want them to hack the car and disable the brakes. And the availability threat is much more disastrous. Machine learning systems can be hacked. Problem with them, and they're kind of opaque nature because you can't detect them. A lot of work done in adversarial machine learning. You move to autonomous systems, and now they can do a lot of things before we can go and turn them off. Cars, medical devices, drones, weapon systems, thermostats, power plants, smart cities. And there's a fundamental difference between your spreadsheet crashes and you lose your data, and your implanted heart defibrillator crashes and you lose your life. It could be the same CPU, the same operating system, the same software, the same vulnerability, the same attack tool. But wildly different consequences because of what the computer is doing, what it's attached to. And so patching is failing in this new world. So our computers and phones are basically as secure as they are for two reasons. One, there's a team of engineers at Microsoft, Apple, Google, and et cetera, doing their best to design them securely in the first place. They're really good teams at these companies. And two, those same teams quickly write patches and push them out when vulnerabilities are discovered. That's the way we get security. This whole ecosystem doesn't work for low-cost embedded systems like DVRs and home routers. These are sold at a much lower profit margin. They're often built offshore by third parties. The designers come together, build them, and disperse. They don't have dedicated security teams associated with them who could write a patch, who know how to design things securely. Even worse, many of these devices cannot be patched. And right now, the way you update the software in your DVR is you throw it away and buy a new one. That is the upgrade path. There is no other. And actually, that throwing away helps us too. We get more security from the fact that we go through our phones and computers every 2 to 3 years. And the new hardware is better, especially with the iPhone. Every model is a little bit better. That churn doesn't happen with IoT systems. You buy a DVR, you're going to replace it, every 5 to 10 years? Your refrigerator every 25 years? You probably expect to replace your thermostat approximately never. And the market can't fix a lot of this because neither the buyer nor the seller care. Right? The buyer and seller want cheap devices that work. Attacking third parties is externality. So think about it. Your DVR at home might have been part of the Dyn botnet. It might be part of whatever that new botnet is that's showing up today. One, you don't know and have no way of finding out. And two, you kind of don't care. Right? It's a DVR, it's working, what's the problem? It's everybody's problem. Right? It's kind of a public health problem, but it's not your problem. So in general, there are two basic paradigms of security. This paradigm A, which is secure it well and properly the first time. This comes from the world of dangerous things. Planes, automobiles, medical devices, buildings. This is security by design, secure engineering. security testing, certifications of products and engineers. Then there's this world, which is make sure your security is agile. It comes from the fast-moving and heretofore largely benign software. Rapid prototyping and update, patching, survivability, recoverability, mitigation, adaptability, all that stuff we saw about incident response. That's all here. Right? This is muddling through. And these worlds are colliding in our cars, medical devices, our voting machines. And we need to collide these worlds somehow. Right? This is hard. 2013, forget which car company, had a major recall. It was Chrysler. 1.3 million cars. Back to the dealership, you got a software update. A few months ago, there's an implantable medical device. Back to the hospital to get a software update. Is this moronic? But this is the way it works. Tesla, at least, will download software updates overnight. Other thing that's changing, one more. Identification and authentication are getting harder. Right? So it's already hard. Human memorable passwords no longer work in most situations. Two-factor doesn't work in some situations. And our sort of backup authentication systems, everyone forgets their passwords, is terrible. The amount of authenticating we are going to be doing is going to explode exponentially. And it's all over the place. It's not people authenticating to people. People authenticating to machines, things authenticating to people, things authenticating to things, without people. And it's really unclear how we're going to make that scale in any way that is secure. We can make it scale that's convenient, but secure is hard. And cybercrime is adapting to this. We're already seeing ransomware against objects. When I say the word ransomware against cars, nobody thinks that's not going to happen. Nobody. We just hope it doesn't happen at speed. Right? DDoS attacks against critical systems. And it's not just criminals. Governments using the same attack vectors. Right? North Korea's attack against Sony was basically a criminal attack. It wasn't sophisticated. Same with Iran versus Saudi Aramco. Or China going into OPM. Or Russia going into the DNC. And these are basically criminal tactics. Right? And the risks are becoming catastrophic. IoT devices affect life and property, and they will even more in the future. I mean, just play the fun what if. Internet-connected traffic lights. That's a bad idea. Interconnected cars. That's really stupid. Interconnected power systems. Ukraine knows how bad that could be. And remember, we're building a robot that affects the entire world. So it's crashing all the cars. It's shutting down all the power plants. These are the sorts of risks that we see in the real world, but because it's spreadsheets, we didn't care. So this kind of is a perfect storm. And yes, to be sure, that is a bad thing. That is not a good metaphor. It's perfect in its awfulness, not in its beauty. Its security is failing just as everything has become connected. And we've been okay for so long with just letting tech do what it wants because it didn't matter. Because it fundamentally didn't matter. And that is what's no longer sustainable. So primarily, I think this is a policy problem. That getting the policy right is critical. And that law and technology have to work together. Actually, I consider this the most important lesson of Edward Snowden. We always knew that technology could subvert law. He showed us how law could subvert technology. And both have to work or neither can work. So I am right now looking at how government can step in and help solve this. And of course, I approach it like an engineer. Right? So governments tend to have a limited toolbox. So to give you sort of what they can sort of do. They can work before the fact. It's known as ex ante in law. And that's things like regulations on products and product categories, licensing of individuals, testing requirements, best practices, things you can mandate beforehand.
Oh, it's still going on? Yeah. I thought you shut your phone.
They can work ex post, which is after the fact. So think of that as fines for insecurity or liabilities and torts. There's stuff they can do in disclosure. So think about product labeling or any other transparency measures, or consumer reports like testing agency, or an NTSB like forensics agency. And lastly, there's stuff they can do in the environment. So funding for research and education, standards making, using procurement to drive improvements. So my belief is that we need to regulate all of the things. IoT devices, algorithms, databases, networks. I could spend an hour on the details here. I'm just going to duck them. Because truly we don't know what they are. We just know we have no choice. You know, probably not in the US anytime soon. Europe is moving in this direction. And the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, coming into force in a few months, is really just as much about security as it is about privacy. And my guess is they're going to go in for a second round once they see how this works. If you buy goods sold in Europe, you'll see a letter CE. Ever know what that means? Basically, it means that it conforms to all applicable standards. There is already a European applicable standard for responsible vulnerability disclosure. They are working on one for secure defaults and patch management. Right, that kind of stuff, whether it's GDPR or these CE/EU regulations, they get incorporated into international agreements, they become part of GATT, and eventually we're doing it. In the US, you look to California, Massachusetts, somewhat New York. On the federal level, it really is the Federal Trade Commission who's trying to regulate some of these things. Thing. I mean, I know that the tech industry has been, sort of nouveau libertarian, leave us alone, pretty much knee-jerk. And again, that was fine as long as it didn't matter what you did. Now that it does, welcome to the world. But good regulations spur innovation. Right? You regulate outcomes, and there's innovation in achieving those outcomes. Insurance industry plays a big role of this. We kind of know how this works. And in fact, our industry is an outlier. Barbers are licensed. You can't cut hair in this state without a license, and you can write software that'll go onto an airplane without a license. And that makes sense to absolutely nobody, I assure you. So there's a lot here. There's international considerations. Right? These are very international problems. I think software is interestingly unique in that write once, sell everywhere is the norm. When you buy a car in the US and in Mexico, they're different cars because of the environmental regulations are different. The engines are tuned differently. When you buy an internet-connected toy, it's the same toy everywhere because that's way easier. So it'll conform to whatever Europe wants, even if it's sold here. No one's going to maintain two toy software bases. That's just dumb. In the middle will be things like Facebook, which probably will do some differentiation, not a lot. It'll be interesting to watch how that goes. So I have a practical problem here. Right? I want to regulate, and I don't have a regulatory structure that tackles this at any systemic level. I have a fundamental mismatch between the way technology works and the way government works. Because government operates in silos. Right? The FAA regulates aircraft. The FDA regulates medical devices. Someone else regulates cars. Someone else regulates boats. The FTC regulates consumer products. And everyone's got their own rules. This is not how the internet works. Right? The internet is the freewheeling, interconnected objects and networks. It grows horizontally, drops barriers, makes new things possible. Now, already on my phone, I have an app that logs my health information, controls my energy use, and communicates with my car. That's 4 regulatory agencies. And that phone's barely doing anything yet. And so we need some sort of holistic solutions. Because whether they're cars or drones or phones, they are all computers first, with different peripherals attached second. And what I think we need is actually a new regulatory agency. It's some sort of computer, technology, robotics, IoT, something, regulatory agency to tackle this at a systemic level. Now, this sounds completely radical today, but this is actually normal. In the 20th century, many new technologies caused the formation of new government agencies. Trains did, cars did, airplanes did, radio did, nuclear power did, vaccines did. That's kind of how we got the CDC. In all of these cases, there was this realization that these new technologies are transformative and government needs a place to put expertise about that technology. Both to understand it, to use it, to advise other parts of government, and eventually to regulate. Because remember, markets can't solve this. Right? Markets are short-term, markets are profit-motivated, and markets cannot solve collective action problems. Right? Fundamentally, that's why government exists, to solve collective action problems. And government is the entity we use to solve these sorts of problems. Now, of course, the devil's in the details. There's a lot here. It's hard for government to be proactive. It's hard to figure out how to regulate properly. I mentioned international. Regulatory capture is a big deal. We know it works. And there's this really weird problem of security versus safety. So the difference between a static safety environment and a dynamic security environment. That adaptive, intelligent human adversary I talked about. Right? How do we make this work in the fast-moving tech environment? Are we going to look more like the airplane industry or the pharmaceutical industry? We're going to look a little bit more like it because we will be another industry that can kill people. But we want to figure this out in a way that regulations don't stifle innovation. And that actually always is the big fear. That's a sort of standard argument here against regulation. It'll stifle innovation. And you hear it all the time. You hear it with restaurant sanitation codes, automobile safety regulations. I think there's no actual evidence it does, but it was a really good talking point. I think if we do it right, the other thing happens. But here's the thing. Government will get involved regardless. The risks are too great and the stakes are too high. Government is already involved in all of those physical systems that are becoming computers. And the physical threats of the IoT will spur government into action. Not to mention actual robots. Right? The courts are going to be an early branch of government that's going to wrestle with this. Regulatory agencies, and then I think some states. The Congress will follow last, but nothing motivates the U.S. government like fear. Right? 9/11 happens. And with a few months and zero debate, a small government administration creates a massive federal agency out of piece parts. Because when there's a disaster, Congress will be pushed to do something. And it's likely to be ill-conceived and rushed. So our choice is no longer between between government involvement and no government involvement. Our choice is now between smart government involvement and stupid government involvement. And I believe we need to start thinking about this now, both the pros and cons, the details, the ramifications, so we're not surprised. Technically, I think we need to start disconnecting systems. If we cannot secure complex systems, then we must not build a world where everything is connected and everything is computerized. And we need to think some more different models, more distributed systems, more self-empowerment. There's a big push in Silicon Valley towards centralization, but there's no real reason why except it's profitable. And my belief is that we're soon going to reach a high watermark of computerization and connectivity. And then afterwards, we'll make more conscious decisions. And there's an analogy with nuclear power here. There's a high watermark of nuclear power in the 1970s. Everything was going to become nuclear. 3 Mile Island happened, and people had pause. We didn't get rid of nuclear power. It just became, a piece in our energy portfolio that had benefits, that had risks. And it wasn't nuclear everything. My guess is we're going to hit the same thing soon. I mean, not now. I think we're still in the honeymoon phase of connectivity. Remember that NSA slide, collect it all? We're kind of in connect it all. But my guess is we come back in 10 years and we'll be moving out of that. My last point. Technologists need to get involved in policy. As the internet security becomes everything security, internet security technology becomes important to overall tech, security, everything policy. And all of the policy issues will have strong tech components. And they will never get the policy right if they get the tech wrong. And you can see it. Watch the going dark debate. Watch the vulnerability equities debate. Watch the debate about internet voting. Or car-to-car driver communication, car-to-car communications. When you watch an Apple versus FBI debate, we might see it again with this new Texas shooter. You just saw the technologists and policymakers talking past each other. Follow the DMCA, exact same thing. We need to fix this. This is ours to fix. Technologists need to get involved in policy discussions on congressional staffs, in federal agencies, at NGOs, in the press. And this is actually bigger than security. Pretty much all policy issues have tech components. But we need to build a viable career path for technologists in the same way there is a career path for public interest attorneys. Right, I teach at Harvard. Right now, 20% of the Harvard graduating class goes into law for the public interest. Computer science graduating class, approximately 0. Now, it's not the fault of the students. There isn't the ecosystem. You spend a year clerking for a Supreme Court judge, and that's good for your career. You're a technologist, spend a year at the Federal Trade Commission, you've wasted your year. A lot of things have to change. But we need to do this, or bad policy will happen to us. Thank you.
I'm willing to take some questions.
I'm willing to take some questions. Here's a question now. Let's take it.
Are you willing to ask questions? Terry Landon. So you
Wait for
probably
the mic.
Oh. Just so the folks. Terry Lynn. You probably have noticed, but the government isn't getting much done these days. Of the 1,000 or so questions I'd really like to ask you, I think the one that keeps popping up in my mind is just the education problem around security. I participate in standards making activities, and it doesn't seem like people who are well equipped to bring the technology to bear on a problem can actually start with even a reasonable threat analysis. So they tend to paint everything with the same brush. So we are raised by our parents to look both ways before crossing the street. We know that electricity can shock us. We know that we should eat safe food and so forth. But I don't think until people really sort of internalize how security can affect them, or bad security or lack of security can affect them, that the government will really be in a position to sort of act on this.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, we're done, because that's not going to happen. And we can't build a world. We need to be an expert to do the thing, right? So just as you're not a pharmaceutical expert, or I can get an airplane without knowing anything about airplane safety, I need the world to be for the naive user. And even going up into the policymakers, I think people who know security are incumbent to be in the process. They need to recognize they need us, but we need to be there. I don't think we can wait for education. I think it's going to be generational or not happen at all. And policy has to work. I mean, right now, legislators don't know anything about anything. They're not experts in anything. They have staff. So whether it's foreign policy, tech policy, they have staff to do it. And this is going to be a place where they're going to need staff. I see no other way. I might not like it, but until I get a better alternative, other than, well, we're just all dead, and that's the way it goes, I think we're stuck. See a hand there. Okay, I guess we might run and then there.
So, the recent fiasco with the Intel management engine?
I've been busy. That happened today, right? Or like yesterday. I haven't read about it yet.
It's been, I think, a week or two.
Okay, it's still in my queue.
In two lines, basically, they had the hardware management engine inside all the chips, and it's had a flaw for the last 8 years or so. It runs a mini Minix operating system with a full network stack, and who knows which NSA-ish agency has access. But anyway, so the question is actually, given that we can open source a lot of things, even hardware, software, and it helps a lot for catching security flaws and so on. But the one piece so far is the chip, which unfortunately there doesn't seem to be a solution where we can have an open source CPU.
Yeah, and actually there are open source hardware projects, but I think in the main you're right. The answer here is going to be some sorts of resilience measures, some ways where those insecurities can exist and matter less or not matter. I mean, and there's research in this. There's a lot of tech here. I actually don't think our problems are tech. I think our problems are using tech, getting tech applied. That if we could make the economic incentives work properly, which is what government does, is change economic incentives, then there will be tech and tech solutions. Not sure where they're going to come from, but unless the market demands them, no one's going to do them. No one's going to install them. So you need to build the substrate of society on which innovation works. It's very nebulous, but that's basically government's job.
Steve Finion might have a comment on that.
Steve Hanna. First, I'd like to say thank you for raising these issues. I've spent some time up on Capitol Hill a couple of years ago, visiting up there and talking about IoT security, and then just about a month ago. And I see a tremendous increase in knowledge, especially among the staffers and Homeland Security Committee and things like that.
That's where it matters.
Yes, and I attribute part of that to your presence there and the influence that the IoT Cybersecurity Act of 2017 and others have had. So thank you for that. As an engineer, whenever I'm thinking about a new idea or a new approach, I like to prototype it. I like to try it out and see if it works and how well it works and tweak it. And it strikes me that for the approaches that you're proposing, regulating IoT cybersecurity, for example, such an approach, a prototyping approach would be beneficial, and that the U.S. may not be the best environment, most hospitable one in the next 4 years.
The odds of us being first or zero, I think, yeah.
Yes. So, of course, Europe is a good option. What about Singapore or other nations? And also, what about some industries where the industry might be amenable to, in fact, very interested in having some framework like this, such as industrial internet on a voluntary basis?
I'm in favor of that. I mean, I think it's got to be a big enough market. I don't think Singapore has enough weight to do anything.
Europe.
I mean, EU is where it's going to happen, right? We're going to learn from the EU. But I think, California, in the U.S., California and New Massachusetts tend to be the tests for a lot of new things.
Are they working on it?
Yeah, I mean, California, New York, both are. I'm sure California and Massachusetts both are. New York and also somewhat. I mean, we were seeing them being much more regulatorily prescriptive than the federal government, certainly. Yes.
Could you take Markey's bill and place it in this trajectory that you're proposing?
Which bill is Markey's bill?
It's
IoT Cybersecurity Act of 2017.
I did look at it. I don't know offhand. It's a good question, right? And there's any number of legislation that are going nowhere that do some good.
That's one of them.
Right. Because Wyden has a bill that is just basically prescribing what the federal government can buy for IoT devices. That's going nowhere. There's something there's something trying to deal with data brokers that's going nowhere. Warren and I forget who. Yeah, there's a lot that's moribund.
Does it do these various? Each one has merit, right? A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit of merit. And how do we create better merit and coordinate it?
Yeah, so what I like about an agency as opposed to congressional legislation is that agencies tend to be more agile. That they can adapt better than Congress. Congress can pass a law and then 4 years later revisit it. Whereas the FTC can pass a guideline and that can continuously evolve. And that's really what we do in this country, that the Congress produces these sort of broad, here's what you do, and then the agencies interpret that as to what it means. And what it means changes as reality changes. The agencies are good at that. It's not great. Getting law to move at the speed of tech is hard. And it used to be that tech moved so slow that law moved at its speed and it was good enough. The law about the telephone, the automobile, all those things took till the 70s to regulate automobiles and really reduce car crashes. The late 60s, when did the unsafe lane speed come out? You remember? 66. Okay. So, and it was within like a couple of years of that, we got seat belts, we got all sorts of things. So, you need a catalyzing event, congressional action, and then some ability to adapt to reality, which I think is agencies.
Can I ask a question?
No.
Right. So you mentioned John Deere and the trouble the farmers are having with some of the digital rights management that are basically built into some of those farming equipment. Massachusetts is among a group of states that are proposing right to repair legislation. It strikes me that many of these companies are using security or the threat of hacking as a way to try and enforce very restrictive digital rights management and basically prevent device owners or independent repair people from being able to know how their platform works, understand and diagnose problems, and fix them independently. So what is the fix for that in your mind? And do those security claims that companies are making hold any water?
And they're not security. They are protected. It's protectionism. It's companies using this law to enshrine their business to have the government protect their business practices as with force of law. And I think they add insecurity. I mean, that really was my point number 8. That this is a system that is fundamentally insecure, that's being put in place to prop up business models, and actually works against our security. But lots of industries are profiting from it, which can make it hard to get rid of.
Question in the front.
Brad Campish, software. Given that the government is highly siloed, how do you see structuring something that doesn't prevent contradictory legislation coming out?
So this is there's a lot of people thinking about this. There's a couple of, and I tell you, answers I don't know, but let's sort of talk about this. We have 2 models. We have the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, which kind of is this umbrella above 16 very different intelligence agencies and does central coordination. I also have this model that's the GAO and the it's GAO and who does the security clearances? OMB. That sort of do infrastructure underneath. So if any federal agency wants to buy something, they go through GAO. The GAO does this sort of centralized purchasing. So we have these 2 models of agencies sort of working horizontally over different silos. That might be a way to do it, because the problem is that tech is everything. So either if I have this Department of Computer Technology, suddenly it subsumes everybody, which makes no sense, or it has no power, which makes no sense. So maybe it's advisory to everybody. Maybe it coordinates from the top. Maybe you set up different spheres, and again, I don't know. That, I mean, for a car, the whoever they are, transportation board.
NHTSA.
Yeah, so that's right. They regulate the carness. They regulate the fuel pollution, and they regulate acceleration and how the brakes should work. And then this mythical software computer agency regulates how the computer should work, and they coordinate when they have to. And we have that. But because computers are so pervasive, we're going to need some clever model. Because it can't be that all agencies now become the computer agency. That makes no sense. But there's inherent computerness that transcends everything. That we're going to need commonality. It's going to be the same CPU in your car and in your pacemaker. Right? So it's got to be one set of rules for that CPU.
We have time for one more question.
All right, your last question.
So
I know you're going to be judged by your peers by the quality of your question.
your message in some ways doesn't impart a lot of hope. But you deliver it with a brave face, right? Even as vast a cataclysm as the financial collapse 10 years ago produced legislation and a government agency which have successfully been painted as anathema by one of our 2 political parties and one of our big political factions. And yet you have kind of this optimistic vein, which begs the question, how large a cataclysm are you expecting?
It's a good question. I tend to be short-term pessimistic, long-term optimistic. I mean, my belief is humanity's better than this, and that we'll figure this out, and that there will be catastrophes, but it won't be, the thing that stops civilization in its tracks.
That robot is making us stupid, though.
Yeah, I know. So my guess is we'll get through this. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure how big a cataclysm will happen.
What's your best guess?
It's too far in the future to get. There's too many unknown variables. I could just look a couple of years, and it's still not going to be that critical. You know, I think the first time we'll see real loss of life will be automobiles. It'll be something, and it will be either, you know, all the traffic lights turn to green, or all the cars turn to no brakes, or something like that.
In Boston, they drive.
It's a weird say. Right. Everyone says disaster, and we say, oh, it's Tuesday rush hour. Yeah. Okay, great.
Science fiction callback. You should read I Have in a Mouth by I'm a Scream by Harlan Ellison.
Yes, that is a fine book. I'm not sure that's really what we're looking for.
Well, so back to the world as a computer comment.
Yeah.
The idea of robots as sentient objects versus pervasive intelligence.
Right. Yeah. That's true.
Or we can say Skynet is being built and resistance is futile.
I, for one, welcome my robot overlords. All right, thank you very much.
And thank you all for coming. I'm mindful of the hour. Both our hosts, so stay tuned for information on next month's meetup. And again, if you've got ideas, if you've got speakers, if you've got themes, let me know. I'm happy to hear it. And thank you so much.
Alex over LinkedIn. He's a friend of mine in part of Black. Yeah.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
All right, I will.
Yes.
They haven't been trying to feel how
I know. I say me for myself. Are you involved?
but yeah.
Okay.
Nice to meet you. Jeremy. And then they get to the process. Okay, good. It usually takes me a couple of
I was involved in that. Yeah, I was involved in that.
Oh, yeah.
This is where I know you from.
Yeah.
That's my family. Yeah.
Just the chicken.
Great questions, as always, my dear. Continue.
Well, no, these are giving the ISPs the right to be able to regulate and control other companies.